欢迎来到音桥第5届当代音乐节。音乐会3是由德国作曲大师 Dieter Mack 的微型专场音乐会呈现。Welcome back to Concert 3, a miniature portrait concert with Dieter Mack. The composer himself will speak about his piece, Luft. This program is supported by Goethe-Institut Malaysia, Ensemble Musikfabrik, Landesmusikrat NRW and Ministerium für Kultur und Wissenschaft des Landes Nordrhein-Westfalen. 我们来听听音乐会3。
Some remarks on my compositional thinking and some technical aspects in connection with my piece Luft from 2012. Chamber music works with larger ensembles can be found as significant pillars throughout my compositional work since 1988. It is especially obvious in the Kammermusik series that started in 1988 with 10 players and extends to Kammermusik 5 in 2007 with 29 players. When I wrote Kammermusik 4 in 2004 and 5, I discovered a hidden developmental line from number 1 and then until number 5. But at the same time, it was evident that I could not continue like that. The amount of 29 players invites the question whether the term Kammermusik, chamber music, itself is still adequate. In fact, the title still fits here because with a few exceptions, Kammermusik 5 has no sections of individually played instruments. There are small groups of instruments playing in rhythmic unison, vertical mixtures, changing all the time, overlapping, and thereby creating new musical colors or sounds. As Helmut Lachenmann once said, composing is creating one's own instruments. And in my case, it was through the continuous changing combination of instruments playing together in a mixture-like unison. It was certainly not different when I composed Luft for 15 players, a commission by Studio Musikfabrik under the leadership of the oboist and conductor Peter Veale. It is common practice in my music to look for the characteristics of the players who give the commission to me or who premiere it. It is even more important with the youth ensemble because one cannot start from the standpoint of neutral professionalism. At that time in 2012, I was really fascinated by the high playing level of these young musicians compared with other youth ensembles. Their advantage is undeniably the attachment to the famous Musikfabrik ensemble. It means there is always a professional musician around to clarify playing problems if necessary. Furthermore, it is the congenial way of Peter Veale to motivate the students at any time. And this was really necessary with Luft, because until that time, it was, according to Peter, by far the most difficult piece the ensemble had ever played. Especially for the vocal sections, a quite psychological issue, the youngsters needed quite a long time to practice, and only after 5 to 6 performances were they able to execute the vocal parts with the intended intensity and personal conviction. In other words, to compose for younger students does not mean to write simple and banal. On the contrary, it was the main challenge for playing the piece. Although the individual parts have their difficulties regarding micro-intervals and complicated rhythms, the main problem is the collective aspect in performing these rhythms. Everyone is forced to listen closely to one's partner and to react accordingly, much more than in other pieces. Consequently, conducting is only helpful and necessary up to a certain degree. However, the main work of the conductor takes place during the preparational phase with various smaller but always changing groups. I'm sure it would be the same problem with a professional ensemble because one has always to get back to find a collective breath. Now about some aspects of my composing. During the 1980s, my composing processes generally started with a thorough preparational working phase, including detailed pre-structuring of the basic parameters like form, pitch, harmony, and rhythm. During the late 1990s, my method of composing became more open. Besides, I did not compose much during that decade due to my occupation in Indonesia from 1992 to 95. And in the late 1990s, my focus was more on educational compositions, in a way a result of my work in Indonesia. The breakthrough to new compositional approaches started in the early millennium with my first percussion concerto, Wu, and the saxophone duo, Silisi. In Wu, it was mainly the mixture technique, a combination of harmony, orchestration, and voicing with rhythmic unisono lines that led to new energetic expressions. Silisi brought me to a peculiar dialogue-shaped polyphonic writing, but it had more to do with the two persons or personalities I wrote the piece for. However, it was the start of two long-lasting series of unusual duos and trios that continue until today. Unusual refers to the unique combination of instruments like, for example, violin, oboe, and bass koto, or double bass and flute. Starting my new professorship in 2003 in Lübeck was certainly not less important for a completely new attitude and motivation. I'm often asked what would be the primary trigger for beginning a new composition, and I must admit that I cannot give a clear or even systematic answer. The players or the ensemble itself that ask me for a piece of music certainly play an important role, especially the attitude, character, motivation, preferences, etc. But I also write pieces without any purpose, just because I'm interested to do so. Those ideas are often technical when I feel like being a kind of scientist who tries to solve a certain problem. Ligeti was very famous for such an approach, although he wrote completely different music than I do. To be clear at this point, relations to texts, poems, pictures, events, or other programmatic issues never appealed to me. Although a lot of such experiences may come up with the listener of my music. I'm fully convinced that the sounding material itself must have a peculiar suggestive notion which may not coincide with my own one. However, I would never speak to anyone about my own associations. After collecting ideas, processes, short phrases, sounds, partly even from own previous works, I need a rough plan first before I can go deeper into the material of a composition. This written rough plan includes the overall formal structure determined by character and various processes, transitions, temporal considerations, and even some more details for each part, including some ideas for the instrumentation. Most important is the necessity to develop an idea of how a piece might end. Only then I am able to make further preparations based on the main ideas and targets and get deeper into the substance of the piece. The main body of these preparations are harmonic or chordal systems and a network of temporal or rhythmic derivations. Finally, when it comes to the real compositional process, it may not be unusual that I ignore up to 60% of these preparations, but they are important to feel more comfortable with the new language of each piece. One may wonder that I did not mention any kind of pitch organization, because a lot, if not most, music in the 20th century deals primarily with pitch organization. I admit that pitch organization or the pitch considerations are only important as upper or lower notes of chordal series or as cantus firmus-like central tones. In some cases, real melodies appear, and they are mostly derived from those origins. With a few exceptions, ornamental aspects or even microtonal principles are decided spontaneously. Harmonic systems, special chords, and harmonic processes are in fact the main body of most of my compositions since 2001. The reasons are manifold, and I have demonstrated them extensively in some lectures and an article that will be published soon. Let me say a last word to rhythms. People often complain that my rhythms are quite complicated. As a matter of fact, composers from the so-called new complexism work with much more complicated constellations. But in their polyphonic textures, utmost preciseness is less important during performance. In my music, it is different because the extensive collective unisono playing of rhythms asks for that utmost preciseness. And even if players, so to speak, deviate from the notation after some performances, it must be a collective deviation. Finally, where do these rhythms come from? Don't worry, they do not derive from very serial techniques or certain mathematical calculations that are more theoretical and work on the paper but less in sound. Sometimes there are a few mathematical principles that have a musical impact, but I use it in quite limited and fully functional situations, which are related to macrostructuring and temporal organization. For me, it was always important that A, rhythmic phrases can be experienced physically, and B, have a kind of rhetoric or talking-like character. While the first point may be related to my background in jazz, rock, and Balinese gamelan, the second one is definitely related to one of my idols, Frank Zappa. In an interview, he once remarked, quote, "You see, one of these things about those kinds of rhythm is they're more related to rhythms of human speech than normal music notation is. People do not talk like this unless they are very sick. And that's the way normal music notation is, you see. People talk with rhythms that go all over the place. So why not have melodies and have the same rhythms that resemble human speech? It is the make it talk syndrome. And you know where I got that? Not from contemporary music. I got it from Johnny Guitar Watson's guitar playing." End the quote. Now, some more remarks about Luft, which means air. As the title Luft, air, already suggests, the piece is based on breath or air noises produced by voices or through the instruments themselves. Then, step by step, they lead to concrete pitched elements. However, it does not happen in a linear way, but there are many partly overlapping processes based on an imaginary musical dramaturgy. Many people here know that I'm very skeptical regarding the catalog-like use of so-called advanced playing techniques. I do not want to push the issue here, except mentioning two aspects. First, sounds achieved with new playing techniques are often from a completely different sound quality compared with those deriving from conventional playing. And many things can only be realized in special slow tempos. Second, for me, all instruments have been carefully constructed and imply a specific determination function, as well as an individual aura. They can be played by using any natural or immanent extremes of the respective instrument. But many so-called new playing techniques tend to destroy or at least damage the instruments. These are complete no-goes for me. And even if I would have a sound idea that could be produced in such a way, I would look for other more suitable or even more ethical solutions. I admit that especially the second point is a completely subjective one, and nobody has to follow it, but it is worth to think about. Here, one may find the key why I ask for vocal actions by the instrumental players. It is one of my ways of extending the instrument. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, now it would be the moment to get deeper into the compositional substance of the piece, but I will stop here. If anyone is more interested in further details, a thorough analysis will be published soon in a book called Collected Writings, published by the University of Music Lübeck. So far, have a good time and enjoy the performance with Ensemble Musikfabrik under the leadership of Peter Veale. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Dieter Mack, for bringing Luft to this festival. Dankeschön. That concludes Concert 3. Next up at 6 p.m. is a very special concert with Cube Band Trio with pipa, guzheng, and percussion. 我们休息一下，再见. See you soon.